Hello and welcome to The People's View. My name is David Schoeneman. I'm your host on this episode. People's View, we take a conservative or constitutional look at current events that are happening in and around the state of New Hampshire that have a bearing on our life here in Nashua. We think it's very important that voters at home understand what's going on, and we'd like to share our perspective. I'm joined in the studio today by two distinguished colleagues who have experience in government here in the state, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Well, I'm Carl Seidel, a four-term representative on the state and on the Public Works Committee.
And I am Sandra Ziem. One of the biggest honors of my life was that I served for 12 years on the Nashua School Board. I even had a short term as the chair of the board, excuse me. And then I also served as county commissioner for 6 years, where I also served as chair. So definitely they were two of the greatest honors of my life, and I will always be grateful to the voters for giving me their trust in those wonderful positions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for coming on. We've got a former state representative, we have county commissioner and local school board, and I was an alderman too. So we're bringing a perspective of three different areas of New Hampshire government to bear for our folks at home. A couple of issues that are certainly current events that we've been reading a lot about, and I think if anyone's been following the news, either on TV or radio or Telegraph or Union Leader these last few months, we've seen a lot of news about the assessing department here in the city of Nashua. We've had Lori Ortolano, a very concerned citizen from Berkeley Street, on our show. I've had her on my show too. I have a separate show. And there's been a lot of news too in the paper. Most recently, we saw an article about the burden the city is claiming Mrs. Ortolano is putting on them with the right to know request. It's very interesting. I mean, she went to the city raising some concerns that she had with her assessment and with the taxes that she had to pay, and she was, I think, stonewalled in many cases. Many people, you can't beat City Hall, right? That's the old slogan. So she went there, wasn't getting the responses, and then she ultimately had to start pursuing things on her own, which included right to know requests. And to some extent, the city may be overreacting to that. If she requests one page, they give her 400 pages. That's not, it's not fair to blame her for the request if she asked for one page and they give her 400 pages. That was in the paper. But it's very interesting to see what's going on. Now, Sandra, you're in the real estate business.
Yes.
And so you've had to deal with appraisals for financing. In your experience, or from your perspective, are there issues, discrepancies?
Well, if you think about it, there are obviously issues. Today, it's not uncommon to do what they call drive-by appraisals. And that is to say, they go to the city's assessor's card and they get the particulars, the square footage, which obviously square footage is one of your most valuable. That information needs to be accurate because that makes a plus or a minus on that assessment, obviously. Well, if it's off, then it can be troublesome because it can affect the appraisal one way or the other. If you're doing a drive-by, you're not going in. You're just taking it for somebody's, maybe, I think sometimes what happens is when the house is originally built, they build it at a certain spec, but then over the years people add. Like they might finish the basement, or they might add a dormer, or they do all kinds of things to increase the square footage, or to increase the value. If I put all new windows and a new roof and new siding and new hardwood floors, does that increase the value? It absolutely does. But you have to go inside to see those things. So, and to save money, they've gone to this drive-by assessment. And so when you do drive-bys, and the reason I think a lot of it happens is people, and I maybe shouldn't say this, but people aren't always honest, because if they put all of the improvements in, what's going to happen? Their taxes are going to go up.
Right.
And so people tend to say, well, I won't mention that little bit there. And so you really, to do a true assessment of a property and have it be sure that it's fair and equal, A to B, if you will, property A to property B, then you really have to be in both of them to see the significant differences that affect these values. So I don't think it's always intentional, but over the years, many discrepancies on almost, there are going to be some discrepancies on almost almost every, I would say very few assessor cards are not going to have some discrepancies.
Right. Well, Lori Ortolano began her investigation based on some discrepancies that she saw between her property and a comparable house in the neighborhood. Her property was assessed at a much, much higher value than this other property was, and so she began looking. And the further she looked, the more troubles she found, and so the investigation, I'll call it an investigation, kind of branched out. I think there's some implied malfeasance. There's some issues with some employees that are being investigated, but it's definitely a problem, and it's not just for her property. There were a lot of properties, I think, where people started calling her up and saying, well, I have the same issue in my house.
I think there were two big points. One, it was something like 1990, that the last time they did a complete analysis of it, and it's supposed to be done every 10 years, I think, Sarah?
Yes, and when they do it, it's not always complete. When you use the word complete, that implies to me that they're equal, that somebody has walked in and physically looked at
Right.
every single house. But everything always comes down to money. And if you do a drive-by, is it cheaper than if you have to go inside each and every one? It can be significant money. And when the cities are trying to save money, that would be a way. They could say, we're just going to take a percentage. We're going to every year or every time we do an appraisal, we're going to do a certain percentage of them, and that way you're going to save a lot of money. But is it going to be, again, going to these discrepancies, it is just natural that over time there are going to be glaring, significant, so that I can appreciate that Lori, I think you said her name was, that Lori might see a glaring difference in her property and another property
It's a
that
glaring difference.
could be next door to her even.
Right.
So because I personally have seen
Sure.
that. And expensive appraisals, a residential appraisal, if they go in that house, and when you buy a house, the lender insists that it is an on-site appraisal. You have to go in. That's $450 per house. If you do a multifamily, it's like $695. And then, of course, it goes up from there. If you got 6 or 8 units, and if it were commercial, it could be in the thousands of dollars. So commercial appraising is like any other business. It can be very expensive.
Well, you depend upon the processes being written and followed by the people. You depend
To be
very
fair.
much to be fair.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things that I think she found
Yes.
lacking. The procedures were not there, or they weren't followed if
And
they
she-
were there.
Probably doing a great favor to our city to bring it, because squeaky wheel gets the oil, is that what
Right.
I want to say? Sometimes in an effort, because there's never enough money in the budgets, you must certainly have seen that as an alderman. And so when there's not enough money, they start looking for places that they can cut corners. And that's that's an overused one. Because I'm in real estate, I'm very aware that it is overused. And
The other element is if somebody asks for an abatement, don't you then require them to do a in-house inspection if they're asking for an abatement?
I think if there's an abatement, yes, they have to go in and take a look. But for this full measure and list, for instance, law says that the homeowner does not need to let somebody in.
Right.
Now, so there are always going to be some discrepancies, but as time goes on, they get magnified. And I think a big part of the problem is, as you say, the procedures were lacking. There's also, it looks like she's uncovered a lack of professional leadership within that department. And her opinion, and I share it, so I can say it's my opinion, is that the city should start with getting professionals in that role and then work on the full measure and list. But doing just a full measure and list, I don't think is going to
Well, one
solve
of the things
problem.
that I think they're talking about is having an outside company come in to do this
Right.
whole analysis, but they're using the same company
Yes.
that's been doing it already.
Right.
And she uses the example that of the abatements, and let's take it as a number, I think she just uses to show the amount, is that there were 600 abatements, and 400 they handled themselves to look at, and a certain percentage did get a change in the value. And they had 200 they farmed off to the company that made the original assessments. They found no changes.
Yeah.
And that seems to be just right there, in my mind, a big red light.
Yes, yeah. The process, I don't think, is fair. It's not as accurate as it should be. I know that perfect accuracy is not going to be possible, but clearly there are issues.
I have to wonder about cost when you're talking about it, because you sound like you're much more read on it than I might be. But how many assessor cards do they have in the city of Nashua? And if they did a $450 appraisal on all of those houses, what kind of money, significant monies, I'm sure you can, and so I'm sure at the heart of this is that money. It's always, I maybe you didn't find that, but I always found that with issues on school especially, I found that if you gave it here, you had to take it somewhere else, because the money you got was still going to be the same.
Well, that's the way economics works. We have this conversation at home all the time. And the first rule of economics is you cannot spend the same dollar twice. So we cannot spend it here and then spend it there. So if we're going to spend it here, we have to take it from there. And that's just the way it works.
David, the simplistic view to that for me is when I buy kids shoes for the kids.
Right.
I have 5 kids, and I say, well, who gets the new shoes this month? Because they're not all 5 going to get them.
The guy with the biggest feet.
Well, you look at shoes,
because the other
has
ones
the
can wear
biggest
those
hole.
later.
So
it's a. But when I was on the school board, when you have an organization as large as the city, and when you have it's large, and so there were times when I on the school board knew that some of our employees were not where they were supposed to be, doing what they were supposed to be doing when they were supposed to be doing it. And even was sharing with you folks earlier, I think, that I remember actually going to somebody's house so that I could say, I'm standing in front of their house right now, and they're not at work, they're at home, they're watching TV.
That's a very interesting point. Thank you for bringing that up. That's one of the things that Mrs. Ortolano found, too, in the course of her investigation. She found that the person who was claiming to be doing all these property card reviews was not going to work. He was watching porn on computers that were owned by the city. He was parked in a parking lot on the telephone or taking a nap or whatnot. So that's a misuse.
And the unfortunate part is
taxpayer
that
funds.
most of these people, when they get caught, if they get caught, once in a while they do, but not often, but when they do, what penalty do they pay? It has been my experience that most of them are people who have enough time in that they have retirement, so they just take their retirement. They say, well,
And that's what you saw, because when you were on the
that's
school
exactly
board,
what I saw.
you saw an employee that the city defended to the end, and you found out this person was not going to work. They were, in fact, just staying at home watching TV,
and I had
maybe
to do
answering
it.
the phone if somebody
They
called.
wouldn't believe it. That was the unfortunate part. And I can understand. You never want to believe. No, I never
Right.
want to believe that people
I
are
know.
misusing our taxpayers.
But we
We're
shouldn't
all
be
taxpayers.
naive.
No, being naive, especially if you're in a position of trust. For me, when I have a position, at the end of the day, I ask myself, did you do your best? Were you honest and fair? Did you listen to everybody? And then did you make your own assessment and try to be not be influenced by a friend or by, and we're all human, and sometimes we let these things influence us when we shouldn't.
Sandra, in all the time you were in real estate, did you have any interaction with the State Board of Assessment?
Never did.
Never did?
Never did.
Well, this has been raised to the state.
I,
They, when Lori made her presentation, she handed them a 62-page document on what she found. And that's going to be some analysis that they're going to come out back with.
But in my view, she was doing great service to our city. It's not always popular when you're the one who points out a discrepancy. It's not. People, because, it upsets the business as normal, if you will. But if there was never a citizen who tried to make sure that things were what they should be, we keep each other honest. And if we
Right.
don't, the balance in government is gone. And
Well, I think it's
balance is-
gone here,
Well,
largely. I think
unfortunately-
accountability is not something that that is being rewarded in this case. I think there was a lot of stonewalling. There's protection of employees who aren't doing their jobs. There's exaggeration about the burden of the right to know request being placed upon the city. It's not fair. But accountability is a very important thing. And so I'm grateful to Mrs. Ortolano for taking this on.
To me, accountability, when in the last election, there were great, there was, when elections don't tend to have big names. The last election, as I remember, it didn't have a big name. It was all local, small people like, I consider us somewhat small, no offense.
That's okay.
And so when there are no big names, when the president's not there, or the mayor's not there, or the governor's not there, then people tend to think, oh, well, it's just those little people, it doesn't matter. The reality is that the little people have more effect on that everyday bottom line,
Right.
which is the dollar that you pay for taxes, which gets bigger when that
Right.
bottom line isn't watched.
Right.
So we really, if I could say anything to taxpayers, it would be pay attention and speak up.
Well, that's why we're having the show, and that's why we have people like Loriana. That's why we take a look at what's going on in the news, so that we can let the folks at home know. Because it does come down to taxes, dollars and cents. And just like we said a moment ago, you can't spend the same dollar twice. That homeowner who pays $1 extra in tax because perhaps the assessment isn't balanced properly, or maybe the money's being spent in ways that shouldn't be on employees who don't go to work, for instance, as we've seen in your case and now in the city now. This harms the household economy and the homeowner's ability to fund things like vacations and cars or putting a new roof on the house.
It's in the little things that we make a difference. It is, if you would do great things, start with the little things. I've always been a firm believer.
That's good advice.
That if I can keep my little things straight, can't always do it, you understand.
Sure.
But if you can, it makes a significant difference in your organization and priorities, and those things make a
Sure.
major
One of the
difference.
slogans too that comes out is take care of the pennies and the pounds take care of themselves. And I think that's true. If you take care of the details of the
Yes.
small expenses,
Yes.
if the assessing department had been managed over the years, if some attention had been placed on it, if some of these discrepancies hadn't been allowed to get too big, then we wouldn't be in the jam that we are today. But we've said in the show before, and I think it's an important point. The assessing department is not a big body of voters. And I think when money is spent, it's spent on people who are going to be able to cast votes. And a process, rules and all that, they don't vote. Processes
I
don't
think
vote.
in any organization, whether it's public or private, if you don't check up on the operation periodically, it usually goes the wrong way.
Well, that's certainly what's happened here. And instead, money is spent in places that I think doesn't serve
I
the
think
taxpayer.
we all need to be diligent. We all need to do our part to keep our city the best it can be. And if we're not a team, then the city's not going to work as well as
That's
it
right.
should.
No, I agree
So
with you.
yes.
And I think that this is
And Carl, I
helpful.
think you do a great job doing your part. I mean, I really do. I respect people who do their part because, we're all busy. Life is a challenge. Especially, I think when you raise a family, you have a young son,
Yes,
so
we
you
do.
know it. And it takes a lot of your energy, if you're going to do a good job, it takes a lot. But it's, at the end, you'll be glad.
I think so.
Oh,
We certainly
I
are.
can tell you, mine are all grown now, and
That's great.
I'm just so grateful that they came out somewhat unscathed. Not perfect, you understand. There
Well,
are
nothing's
blemishes.
perfect. We're certainly not expecting
Yes.
perfection from him, and I hope he's not expecting it from us. And we're not expecting it from the city either. But I think that, to your point, that everyone has to participate, Mrs. Ortolano is participating heavily at her own cost. And I think that the city should have been more welcoming of the information that she was providing, because the city didn't collect that data and have that information, and she found it. And these discrepancies and these problems really need to be addressed. And they should have
They should
welcomed
be open that, somebody
Right.
fell down and didn't think that was necessary to audit
Right.
it periodically, see if the things were in place.
That's right.
Unfortunately, it's some people say it's human nature that if you're not watched, you goof off a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think all the operations, whether you think they're perfect, nothing's perfect.
No.
And they have to be reviewed periodically just to catch some of the things that might have happened that nobody even realizes
But it has to
anymore.
be systematic, again, going to how many houses the city, how many assessing cards
yeah.
the city of Nashua has. So if you divide, like, just for conversation, let's say that you did 500 every 10 years, then you'd want to be sure that you didn't do that same 500 the next 10 years. Because
Right.
10 years is a long time. And if you did 500, I'm sure we have quite a few more units than 500 in Nashua. So you can see how long it would take to get
Yes.
through all of those houses. It's a very
Tedious, but are there...
tedious. It is very tedious.
Yeah. Is there guidelines that the state has for this?
Oh, I'm sure
They have a process that they have to do. I know my son's been involved with the state, and some of those processes really haven't been paid attention.
They've not been paid attention to, and that's why they're talking about the full measure and list now. And
That's right.
The price tag, I'm not
Squeaky
sure
wheel.
what it is per property, but the overall cost is $1.3 million. That's what they're looking at spending. The city's looking at spending.
But that's on the
That's an
definition
interesting
of
figure.
what they're going to do now. Now
Yes.
that they're looking, now that the state's looking at it, they may change that. And it may be a lot more, and I think that's part of their problem.
Well,
That's another reason why, if you're going to get into the money that they have left over from the
you
budget,
know, we need to talk about that too, because this all does come down to tax dollars. And with the citywide reassessment that was done recently, many people saw their tax bills, particularly on properties in a certain stratus in the city. They saw their tax bills go up considerably. I know someone whose rental property was reassessed, you know, $100,000 more. And taxes are going up a lot, a lot. And what does the city do with this money? Well, sometimes it uses it to try to cover for mistakes that were made in the past, like this assessment issue. And also, too, now there's the money that is surplus, left over from revenues, and the city's trying to decide what to do with it. Always a couple of options. One of those options is to do what's called buy down the tax rate. We give some of that money back to the taxpayers, and the taxpayers benefit from a reduction in whatever rate is going to be the calculated rate for the following year. Or you put it in a rainy day fund or something like that.
that's what the state has been doing over the last couple of years, and they pay it on things that are not repeatable.
Right.
You know, they don't set up a new department. They pay off.
Right. It's dangerous to set up a
fix
new
or something.
department with one-time money, because
Right.
the money to fund that on an ongoing basis has to come from somewhere, and that increases the burden, which of course then increases taxes even further. So the city right now, also in the news, there's a roughly $5 million surplus that the Board of Aldermen, Mayor and the Board of Aldermen are going to be discussing what to do with that. Now, some of the money that is in that surplus is for things that were appropriated, but projects not completed.
Right.
So that money will be assigned to, it's called like things. It's going to,
Like kind.
right, it's going to continue to be available in the next fiscal year. Other things, though, are new. There's other surplus money that they now want to spend it on other things. And I think one of the best things to do would be to give it back to the taxpayers. Maybe the second best thing to do is to do some one-time things that
Right.
are truly important. And the list is published in the paper, and it may not all be important things.
This new reassessment might be a little bit more than the 1.3 million, too.
It could be more than 1.3 million.
It could,
In fact, it probably will be. My experience on the Board of Aldermen said that whatever project scope you set up initially, that scope is usually understated, I think, for the purpose of getting initial approval.
That's right.
Then once it's underway, then the price tag goes up, and the argument then is, well, we've already spent this much money, let's continue. And then you're on with something that has no end.
There's a
And-
couple of other issues that come to the paper that's already show that too also.
Yes?
We won't go into, we'll save that for another time.
I'll save that for another time. But yeah, we definitely have a surplus, and I think folks at home should understand that this is their money. It's not government money. This is not government money. It's taxpayer money. Governments don't have any money other than what they take. Governments don't earn the money that they spend. They take the money that they spend. So it's not the city's money, it's taxpayer money. And I think people at home should understand and be concerned with how that's going to be allocated. Because when you look at your tax bill, if you think it's too high, you should have some concern about what they're going to do with the surplus.
There's always there's an endless list of things that you want to do. It's like goes right back to what you were saying, David. In your home, I'd love to have a new Cadillac out in front of my house, wouldn't you?
I sure
But
would.
guess what? There's not
I
going to
got
be
a
that.
Nissan Sentra in the parking lot here. That's an old one.
I got mine's older than yours, I bet.
I'll take a Porsche.
That would be nice.
But discipline is
Discipline, I think, is a key word. Yeah.
It's a big word everywhere. It's because I've been involved in the school board. Discipline to me, there has to be accountability, whether it's our children or our city or our county or our state or our families. Even between you and your wife, you're accountable to each other.
Absolutely right.
As a nation, we're accountable to each other. And until we accept that responsibility and do the best we can, and nobody's perfect, but if we keep trying, you don't, it's like you get lemons, you make lemonade. It's so and for the most part, as a nation, we do better than any in the world. So I don't want to beat us up too bad.
Oh, no,
because we're
definitely not.
very
I'm
fortunate
not
to
about
be
tearing
here.
it down. We
Yes.
don't need to tear it down. We've got a
Very
good
We're
system here.
really trying to make people aware of things because you got to stop some of these things before they get so engrossed in something that
Right.
you can't figure out how to do anything with it.
Right.
Well, and what David said that rang in my ear is that sometimes they appropriate the money to start it with no thought
yeah.
of what it's going to cost down the road. And really, the long-term cost is more important than the initial because long-term is forever, at least
I
it
know.
is to me. And so
It's very hard to dismantle a program that's begun when it
I
comes
don't
to
see it
governments.
happen very often. In fact,
No.
it's one of the problems. I think it's in a whole nother stuff. We could go for a whole. I think I'll
Right.
stop because I look at things that we have still going because they've been going for too long.
That's right.
And it's time to step back and say, what are some of these older programs that we could stop?
Yes, I
And
agree with you
think there are plenty
completely.
there.
And speaking of time,
It's
we're out of
out
time.
of time.
The time has gone very quickly once again, so thank you both for coming in. I've enjoyed the conversation. I hope the folks at home have learned something about what's going on in the city, in the state, with the assessing department, and with the surplus. And a lot more issues we'll talk about next time. So thank you very much both
They
for
can
coming in.
get in touch with us.
Yes, get in touch with us. You can reach us on People's View, and of course, the NRCC, National Republican City Committee, is a good source of information. This show live streams on YouTube, and if you ever want to see it live, you can go to NRCC and find it there. And of course, there are links to see tape view. So thank you both very much, and get in touch. We'd like to encourage folks at home to come in and vote and to potentially take a role yourself and run for an office. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.